Hi, I'm Dan Cortopassi. Today I'm reviewing an HO scale Southern Pacific Mt-4 class 482 mountain locomotive from Athearn Genesis. A retro review is a product review of a model that's not a recent release and may be out of production. Examples can sometimes be found on the used market. Also, unlike a normal product review, I may have made modifications to the model. I'll make a note of those, if any, as they come up. My model is DCC ready, but I haven't yet installed a decoder. It's from the run announced in 2015. At that time, the MSRP for this model was $319.98. The MSRP for the version with DCC and Tsunami sound was $419.98. I got mine in May 2016 for $239.99 from modeltrainstuff.com. Athearn announced a new run of these models in June 2021. The MSRP for the DCC ready version, like mine, is $509.99. The MSRP for the version with DCC and sound is $599.99. I didn't see any of these models available used when I searched on eBay. We'll start the model at 100 possible points. The model comes in a large cardboard box. Inside there's a manual with prototype information, exploded view drawings, maintenance instructions, and DCC information. A two-piece plastic cradle protects the locomotive. A layer of clear film gives some additional protection against scratches. The tender comes in a similar cradle. There's a parts bag included with some number board decals. This is a good box that should protect the model for storage and transport. Southern Pacific's 482s with the Skyline casing have always been one of my favorite steam locomotives. When Athearn announced them, I knew I had to get one, even though the real ones were retired long before my usual 1990s modeling era. SP's Mt-4s were home-built in the railroad's Sacramento shops in the 1920s. They were scrapped between 1953 and 1959. It's unfortunate that none of SP's 482s were preserved. Thankfully, I have a few books with good photos of them. When researching a steam engine, it's good to find photos of the particular locomotive you're interested in, as there were often detail variations within a class. SP's MT-class engines were no exception. Some of the more obvious things to look for on Mt-4s are the tender, boiler face, the pilot, crosshead type, and whether the main driver was spoked or cast. SP 4352 was one of 5 Mt-4 locomotives that were assigned to the San Joaquin Daylight, which ran over Tehachapi Pass. These locomotives were painted in daylight colors. The Southern Pacific without the lines lettering on the tender was adopted after World War II, so this locomotive would be appropriate for the late 1940s to the early 1950s time period. This model does an excellent job capturing the overall look and proportions of the real 4352. My model has a cast main driver which matches prototype photos. It also has the correct multi-bearing crosshead. Some Mt-4s had alligator crossheads. The tender appears correct for this engine, as does the pilot. The boiler face matches a photo I have of the real engine from June 1950. Other photos from prior years show it with more bolts around the smokebox door. From what I understand, SP reduced the number of smokebox door bolts on some locomotives in later years. Unfortunately, it's not quite perfect. The placement of the number boards appears to be incorrect for 4352. Photos show that they should be slightly forward of the location on the model. SP originally installed the number boards toward the front of these locomotives and later moved them back so that they would be away from the glare of the headlight. The placement of the number boards is correct for some Mt-4s, including sister engine 4353. Moving the number boards on 4352 would be a big job, so I'm taking 5 points. There are a few small differences in plumbing and other details between the model and photos. You really need to study the photos to spot them. Looking at photos, it appears that there was some variation in piping from one engine to another within the same class. I would imagine that most modelers are just going to run their engines as they come out of the box, and I don't think it's worth deducting more points, but some people might want to correct these small details for a truly accurate model. The paint on the model is opaque and thin enough not to obscure detail. This is especially impressive on the red and orange areas, as it can be difficult to get those colors to cover well. The markings are crisp, free of voids, and most of the small writing is legible with magnification. I really like the thin black outlines around the road number on the side of the cab and the Southern Pacific on the tender, which are sharp and even. There are enough plumbing details along the sides of the model to look good. Up front, the engine has the correct bell, headlight, and class lights for 4352. The class lights are non-functioning. It's worth mentioning that some MT-class engines had teardrop-shaped class lights in front. The model also has the SP-style single-chime air horn. The rounded grab iron on the boiler face extends up a little higher than the one in photos of the real 4352. Lower down, the model has the correct pilot for 4352, complete with an uncoupling lever and air hoses. The draft gearbox appears to extend farther forward than on the real thing, a likely concession to operation. Personally, I'm willing to tolerate that to have a working front coupler. The cab has a detailed interior. On top, the engine has the characteristic teardrop-shaped stack. The skyline casing hides a lot of the detail that you'd normally see on the top of a steam locomotive, but there are some exposed details like the whistle and dynamo. The vent door on the top of the cab does not appear to open. In back, the tender has an uncoupling lever, air hoses, and freestanding ladders. The detail on top looks really good. None of the hatches appear to open. Be careful with the oil dipstick handle, as this little detail is extremely fine and looks fragile. To hook up the tender, first connect the electrical plug on the front of the tender to the socket on the back of the locomotive. A plastic drawbar with a clip on the end fits into the slot in the tender. It'll make a click when it's connected. When making the connection, be sure that the flexible floor plate on the locomotive is over the deck on the tender. Underneath, the main driver has traction tires. The drive wheels pick up current, but the pilot and trailing truck do not. All the tender wheels pick up current. There's enough brake detail on the bottom of the tender to look good when the model is on the track. The model has McHenry plastic knuckle couplers on both ends. According to the Kadee height gauge, the front coupler is at the correct height. The rear coupler is also correct. All the wheels are in gauge according to the NMRA standards gauge. Neither the engine nor the tender has any significant body wobble. The locomotive weighs 18.5 ounces by itself. The tender weighs 7.2 ounces for a combined weight of 25.7 ounces. The NMRA recommended weight for a freight car the same length as the tender is 3.75 ounces. The extra weight should help with tracking an electrical pickup. Drawbar pull peaked at a hefty 4 ounces even on my force gauge. Many HO diesels pull around 2.5 ounces, so this is a strong engine. Even though this engine currently has no decoder, I've put it on a DCC track to make the lights come on full bright. The front headlight has a light leak in the back that lights up part of the boiler face. This is a sloppy feature on an otherwise really high-quality model, so I'm taking 5 points. The train number boards are very bright, but these don't yet have the supplied covers installed. The rear headlight is also operable. This model was made before Athearn started using LEDs and everything, so it still has bulbs. They look brighter on the video than they do in person. I'm running the engine with a DC power pack. It's smooth and quiet and it runs well. Fixing the location of the train number boards is beyond the scope of a product review, so I'm going to leave that for now. I'm not a huge fan of plastic couplers, so I'm going to replace the ones in the model with Kadee 158s. The front coupler draft gearbox is a little unusual. To remove it, first remove the 2 small Phillips screws on either side behind the pilot. Be careful not to lose the screws, they're really tiny. Next, remove the plastic strap that holds the back of the draft gearbox. Now the coupler will pull out from the front. The draft gearbox fell apart outside the model. The larger plastic piece is the top. The Kadee 158 coupler fits nicely in the draft gearbox. Reassembly is the reverse of taking it apart. The front coupler now droops a little. Since the design of the draft gearbox is so unusual, I don't want to mess with it. I'll try a shim under the coupler shank. This is a shim I made from 010 styrene. It's 2 HO scale feet wide to fit within the draft gearbox. I'll secure it with a tiny amount of liquid styrene cement. It's a good idea to make sure that the coupler can still swing from side to side. Mine sticks a little on one side. I'll try a little Kadee Greas-em, which is a powdered graphite lubricant. That helped. A Kadee 158 fits nicely within the rear draft gearbox on the tender. The coupler height came out okay. I've owned this model for several years and it spends most of its time in the box. When I do take it out, it runs very smoothly. Though it has a few small detail issues, this is a nice looking locomotive that runs well. I'd feel comfortable buying it again if I wanted another one, though I'm not too anxious to pay close to $200 more for the latest run. Besides that, I already have one Sunset Brass Mt-4 and another Athearn Genesis Mt-4 in black. Altogether, that's probably 3 more SP482s than someone who models the 1990s really needs, but as I said at the beginning, these are some of my favorite steam locomotives. Let's see what we've got. The placement of the train number boards on the sides of the skyline casing is incorrect for 4352, so I took 5 points in the prototype accuracy category. The front headlight has a noticeable light leak, so I took 5 points in the standards and operation category. That leaves us with 90 out of 100 possible points, which would be an A- on a report card. This is a nice model and it deserves a green signal. Overall, I think Athearn did a pretty nice job on this model. If you're looking for some HO scale Southern Pacific steam power for your layout, then I think you might like it.